Hey, back again with the ultimate historical figures iceberg. Yet again, still a tier 3, so you kinda have to subscribe, as well as like. Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene is one of Jesus' most devoted and misunderstood followers. Mary came from a town of Magdala, a fishing village in the Sea of Galilee. Therefore, that's where she got her name, Mary Magdalene, which means Mary of Magdala. When we first meet her in the Gospels, she's not in a great place. The Bible says that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her, and from that moment on, she became one of his closest and most loyal followers. She followed Jesus throughout his ministry, along with a group of other women who supported him and his disciples financially. She witnessed his teachings and miracles firsthand and was part of his inner circle. During the final days of Jesus' life, she was there at the foot of the cross when he was crucified, standing by him while many others fled in fear. When Jesus was buried, Mary and other women went to his tomb to anoint his body with spices, a gesture of love and respect. But when they got there, the stone covering the entrance was rolled away and the tomb was empty. Mary Magdalene became the first person to see risen Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, she stood outside the tomb crying until Jesus appeared and spoke to her. At first, she didn't recognize him, but when he said her name, she immediately knew it was him. Jesus told her to go and tell the disciples that he had risen, making her the first witness of the resurrection and the apostle to the apostles. So, why does she belong in tier 3? She was one of the most devoted followers of Jesus. She supported Jesus, stayed with him through his darkest moments, and was the first to see and share the news of his resurrection. This made her a key figure in spreading the message of Christianity. Mary Magdalene's story has been clouded by misunderstandings and legends. For centuries, she was wrongly identified as a repentant prostitute, a mix-up due to her being confused with other women in the Bible. But modern scholars and religious leaders now recognize her true role as a faithful disciple and leader in the early Christian church. Mary Magdalene has inspired countless works of art, literature, and devotion. She represents loyalty, courage, and the power of transformation. Mary played a critical role in the birth of Christianity, making her one of the most important figures in the entire New Testament. Thales of Miletus. Now, we will head on over to ancient Greece to talk about Thales of Miletus. Often considered the first philosopher and one of the earliest known scientists, born around 624 BC in the city of Miletus, which is what is now Turkey. Thales grew up in a port city, which was a hub of trade and cultural exchange. This environment exposed him to ideas from Egypt, Babylon, and beyond, which would go on to influence his later work. Thales is known as one of the 7 sages of Greece, a group of wise men whose ideas laid the foundation for Western philosophy. He believed that natural phenomena could be explained by natural causes in a world where the majority explained natural occurrences through myths and gods. One of Thales' most famous contributions was his belief that water was the fundamental substance of the universe. This was revolutionary at the time. Thales proposed that everything originated from water, and he used the idea to explain natural processes. Though we now know that the universe isn't made of water, Thales' idea represented a shift towards scientific thinking. Thales was also an early mathematician and astronomer. He's credited with bringing geometry to Greece, having studied it during his travels to Egypt. Legend has it that he measured the height of the Great Pyramid using the length of its shadow and some clever geometry. He also accurately predicted a solar eclipse in 585 BC, which amazed everyone and demonstrated his understanding of celestial patterns. Thales is best known in geometry for the Thales theorem, which states that if you have a triangle inscribed in a circle and one side is the diameter, then the triangle is a right triangle. This theorem, along with other mathematical observations, paved the way for future mathematicians like Pythagoras and Euclid. Ancient stories also paint him as both wise and with a bit of character. One tale recounts how people mocked him for being too focused on the stars and neglecting practical affairs. In response, Thales predicted a good olive harvest and cornered the market on olive presses, making a small fortune to prove philosophers could be practical if they wanted to. Thales died around 546 BC, and he was remembered not only for his wisdom, but for kickstarting the tradition of using reason and observation to understand the world. He's often called the father of philosophy because he was one of the first to seek rational explanations for the world around us. Before Thales, people typically used myths to explain natural events like storms and earthquakes. Thales' influence extended to mathematics and geometry. His contributions helped lay the groundwork for later thinkers, including Euclid, whose work became the basis for much of geometry as we know it. By proving geometric theorems and showing that mathematical principles could describe the physical world, Thales showed that math wasn't just abstract, it was a tool to solve real-world problems. In astronomy, Thales' ability to predict a solar eclipse demonstrated that natural events weren't random, but followed patterns that could be studied and understood. This inspired future generations of astronomers and scientists to explore the heavens with a rational, systemic approach. Rishabhanatha. Rishabhanatha, also known as Adinatha, was the first Tirthankara spiritual leader of Jainism, which was a religion mentioned earlier. According to Jain tradition, Rishabhanatha lived thousands of years ago, long before recorded history as we know it. His story is a mix of history, myth, and religious teachings. Rishabhanatha was born to King Nabi and Queen Marudevi of the Ishvaku dynasty in Ayodhya, a city that would later become important in many Indian religious traditions. It is said that his mother had dreams before his birth, signaling that he had become a great leader and spiritual leader. During his reign, Rishabhanatha is credited with introducing civilization and teaching people essential skills like agriculture, firemaking, cooking, and the arts of governance. He helped transform human society from a primitive way of life to one based on knowledge, cooperation, and structure. But then one day, he renounced his throne and all material possessions, choosing to live as an ascetic in pursuit of spiritual liberation. He gave up everything, even clothing, and began a journey of intense meditation and self-discipline, practicing non-violence and detachment. After years of practice, he achieved Kavala Jnana, or omniscience, becoming a fully enlightened being. As the first Tirthankara, he established the Jain path of liberation and taught the principles of ahimsa, which is non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, celibacy, and non-possessiveness. These teachings formed the core of Jainism and set a spiritual path for future generations. Rishabhanatha is said to have lived for many years, teaching and guiding people towards ethical and spiritual living. When he completed his mission, he attained moksha, liberation, and left the cycle of birth and death, becoming a liberated soul. For Jains, he isn't just a religious leader. He is the original Tirthankara who established the principles that guide their lives. His teachings emphasize nonviolence, truth, and ethical living, values that have shaped the lives of millions of Jains for centuries. The stories of him introducing civilization, agriculture, and societal order reflect the belief that he played a role in guiding humanity's early development. His legacy continues to be celebrated through rituals, festivals, and teachings with Jainism. Temples and statues dedicated to Rishabhanatha can be found throughout India, and his life serves as a model of renunciation, compassion, and enlightenment. For Jains, he represents the beginning of their faith, the embodiment of their highest values, and a guide to living life with purity and compassion. Saint Nicholas. Now we got Saint Nicholas. He's the figure who become the inspiration for Santa Claus. Saint Nicholas was born around 270 AD in Patara, a city which is now modern-day Turkey. He was raised in a wealthy Christian family, but suddenly his parents passed away when he was young. Instead of using his inheritance to live in luxury, Nicholas decided to dedicate his life to helping the poor and needy. Nicholas became known for his generosity, and stories of his kindness are what made him famous. One of these most famous tales is about a poor man with 3 daughters. In it, a father, needed to provide a dowry for his daughters to marry. But this man had no money, meaning his daughters had to face a grim future. Hearing of their plight, Nicholas secretly visited their house at night and tossed a bag of gold through the window, or in some versions, down the chimney. He did this 3 times, providing dowries for each daughter. Nicholas was deeply devoted to his faith, and he became a bishop of Myra, a city in modern-day Turkey. As bishop, he defended the Christian faith during a time when Christians faced persecution under Roman emperors like Diocletian. He was imprisoned and tortured for his beliefs, but never waived his devotion. Eventually, he was released and continued his work with even greater resolve. Another story tells of how he intervened to save 3 innocent men who had been sentenced to death. He confronted the corrupt officials and exposed their wrongdoing, saving the men's lives and earning respect as protector of the innocent. Nicholas attended the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, a major gathering of Christian leaders called by Emperor Constantine. During the council, he reportedly got into a heated debate with Arius, who argued against the divinity of Jesus. In some versions of the story, Nicholas's passion led him to slap Arius, showing his fiery dedication to defending his beliefs. Though this tale might be more of a legend than fact. Nicholas passed away around 343 AD, but his legacy was just the beginning. He was buried in Myra, and his tomb became a site of pilgrimage. St. Nicholas remains a representation of selfless generosity, compassion, and a commitment to helping those in need. His acts of giving, particularly to children and the poor, inspired the tradition of gift-giving that lives on in many cultures today. The transformation of St. Nicholas into Santa Claus happened over centuries, blending folklore, traditions, and the legends of his generosity. He is also the patron saint of many groups, including children, sailors, merchants, and even prisoners. Today, statues, churches, and festivals around the world honor St. Nicholas, from his roots as a humble, kind-hearted bishop to his legendary status as a protector and giver. Martin Luther. Now we got Martin Luther, who was the one who was the cause of the Protestant Reformation and changed the course of Western Christianity. Born on November 10, 1483, in Eisleben, in what is now Germany, his father, Hans, was a miner who worked hard to give Martin the best possible education. Hans wanted him to become a lawyer, so Martin was sent to study law at the University of Erfurt. In 1505, during a thunderstorm, lightning struck near Luther, and in his terror, he cried out, "Help me, St. Anne, and I will become a monk." True to his word, he left behind his legal studies and joined the Augustinian monastery. Luther then devoted himself to a monastic life, but he was plagued by anxiety and fear about his own salvation. To find peace, he poured himself into studying the Bible and the church doctrine. In 1512, Luther earned his doctorate in theology and became a professor at the University of Wittenberg, where he lectured on the Bible. It was during this time he began to question some of the practices of the church. One practice that troubled Luther was the sale of indulgences. Essentially, these were payments made to the church that promised to reduce the punishment for sins, either for yourself or for loved ones in purgatory. In 1517, a Dominican friar named Johann Tetzel was aggressively selling indulgences near Wittenberg, and Luther had enough. On October 31st, 1517, he nailed his famous 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church. The document criticized the abuse of indulgences and called for the reform in the church. It was a move that quickly spread thanks to the newly invented printing press. Pope Leo X demanded that Luther recant his writings, but Luther refused. In 1521, he was summoned to the Diet of Worms, an assembly of political and religious leaders, and was asked to retract his teachings. Standing before Emperor Charles V, Luther famously declared, "Here I stand, I can do no other." As a result, he was declared an outlaw, and his writings were banned. On his way home, Luther was kidnapped by friends and taken to Wartburg Castle for his own safety. There, he translated the New Testament into German, making the Bible accessible to ordinary people. Over the years, Luther continued to write, preach, and shape the Reformation, despite facing threats and opposition. Luther would marry a former nun, Katharina von Bara, in 1525, breaking with the tradition of clerical celibacy. They had 6 children and created a model of family life that influenced Protestant culture. Luther continued to teach and reform until his death on February 18, 1546, in his hometown of Eisleben. What makes Martin Luther such a big deal is the fact that he challenged the authority of the Catholic Church at the time, which was nearly unthinkable to do so. By standing up for his beliefs, he opened the door for religious freedom and the idea that faith should be rooted in personal conviction, not just institutional tradition. Also, Luther's translation of the Bible into German made scripture accessible to ordinary people, breaking the Church's monopoly on religious knowledge. The Protestant Reformation that Luther sparked led to the creation of many different Christian denominations, shaping the religious, cultural, and political landscape of Europe and the world.